Okay, so remember last January we did this series called Intuitive and Schmootive? Wasn't a very good series, actually. But what we were trying to accomplish in that series was to say, like, there are things in life that we treat as intuitive, but they're not intuitive, we have to learn them. And so we were trying to say, like, intuitive and schmootive, right? Like I said, it wasn't very good. But one of them in particular, I think, was tone-setting for us, because one of them was really more of a confession for me than it was anything. We talked about this idea that talking about money is counterintuitive. We don't like it. We're not comfortable with it. We don't do it in public school. We don't do it in many of our homes. Like, you don't talk about it. And in particular, what I talked about that week was, I suppose it was a confession as much as anything from me, that for me, in this role that God has me in, getting to lead, narrate, or whatever you want to call that, I meant the leadership, not the narrate part, that it's very counterintuitive for me to talk about money, for all the reasons that we're all familiar with. And the stuff that came to a head that week that we tried to talk candidly about, or I tried to talk candidly about, is that to take that stance is really a failure of leadership on my part. That for me to refuse to talk about money, for us to refuse to be honest about the financial piece of being a church and God's kingdom and obedience would be a failure of leadership on my part, because how ironic would it be if, as much as we are excited about this movement and invest in this movement and think God and Jesus are with us in this movement, how ironic if it failed because its leader was too big of a wuss to talk about money. Not in a guilting, shaming, arm-twisting way, just in a candid, like, being church the way we're trying to be the church takes resources. And lots of resources at times. And so what came out of that week was we really just established and decided that the first of every month, we'll just be real. And we'll roll out, here are the giving numbers, here are the spending numbers, here's where we're at on the budget. And so we have those from December. Though my interest is not necessarily those, it's kind of a springboard this morning. In fact, you might remember that we ended that service, and when we ended it, I said, okay, here's part of what I'm realizing, is that we had made it this far. So from October of 2009 to January of 2011, we had made it that far on the generosity and obedience and giving of those people who learned how to give. They developed that muscle, if you will, somewhere other than Narrate. Again, more irony then, because we're afraid to talk about it, but people who learned it somewhere else are glad to let us receive blessing from it. And so what we said in January was, we're only going to make it to January of 2012. Ta-da! If people who learn to give elsewhere combine with people who are meeting Jesus and reconnecting with the church through Narrate, if Narrate develops that muscle in people who are reconnecting through us, those two groups coming together, that'll be the only way we'll make it. And in fact, one of the realities that I'm more and more aware of is that tension's never going to go away. That to be a church who's consistently growing in influence and growing in mattering, there's always going to be this tension of those who already have the muscle as well as helping people who don't yet have it get it and understand God's heart on it. So that's one reason why I said it's counterintuitive and a failure of leadership on my part to not talk about money. But there's another, and I don't know that we've touched on it yet. The other would deal with the fact that, money matters. And it wreaks all kinds of havoc in lives. And something that occurred to me over the break, I guess, was the reality of, I was on this run. I remember I was in Billings, and I don't like running there because it's all streets. And I was running along, and I was processing with God this 20-mile march thing, which is something we talked about on December 18th. And I had this moment where it was like, I don't say this very often, but I felt like the Lord was just kind of with me and communicating some stuff, where not audibly, but you know what I mean. Where I just realized that as much as we talk about mattering in those other 6 days, that we want to matter on Sunday, don't we? I mean, isn't it kind of an unspoken value and goal we have for our gatherings, is that they matter? That people, no matter where they're at in their spiritual journey, no matter whether they declare Jesus as Lord or not, that no matter where they're at in that process, that they would leave here better, more equipped to love people well, and not in a patronizing way, not in a like we have all the answers way, but just in a like creating good conversation about parenting and marriage and finances and relationships and work and community and service and selfishness and all those different things. Like, don't we want this to matter? In fact, there's a couple stories that kind of confirmed all this and maybe even made me aware of all this. I think it was probably in October, a gal came up to me, and she'd been hanging out with us, coming to gatherings for a few weeks, I think, and some friends had brought her. And she came up to me and she said, Adam, I want you to know that I'm not Christian. And she kind of explained her religious background. And she said, But I want you to know, like, my friends invited me here and they said that I would enjoy it. And I want you to know that, like, my weeks are better because I come and experience these gatherings. Like I'm a better mom, and like, you know, I can start putting words in her mouth. But the ethic of it was just like, okay, life is better for me. And that, for me, was one of the more encouraging interactions I've had the whole semester. That someone who finds it safe to process with Jesus at the same time goes, hey, thanks for it mattering. Another one that I had right before Christmas was a guy came up to me and he said, Adam, my buddy, wheels fell off in his life. I knew that. I called him. I asked him if I could take him out for a beer. He said, I don't need you to take me out for a beer. I need you to help me find God. He looked at me, standing down here, and he said, Adam, I wanted to take him to the bar. He was asking me to take him to church. I haven't invited anyone to church for 17 years, he said. And then he said, but he was with me this morning, and we talked about the 20-mile march that morning, and he said, and he like was glowing, you know, and this guy starts rambling, and I'm rambling, because this is so exciting, right? Like, and his point was, thank you. And that has to do with the ushers and the greeters, and it has to do with the kids department, and it has to do with sound and behind-the-scenes stuff and the music and the whole deal. Don't we want this to matter? Not just split firewood for people who can't afford to feed their homes, but we want this to matter too. And I say all that to say that if our desire is for this to matter, then we have to talk about money. It would be a failure of leadership on our part if we didn't. Because the number one cause of divorce in America continues to be what? It's not even news to us. Financial issues. Did you know that it's a growing cause for suicide, particularly among 20-somethings? And it doesn't take a lot of energy to put yourself there. An 18-year-old gets a Visa card in the mail, and maybe no one's ever talked to them about Visa. They get $500 from nowhere. They charge up. They go to college, where they start taking out student loan after student loan. And then before they know it, they're 25 years old, and they may or may not have a degree, and they may or may not have somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 of debt. And then they go get their first job, the one that they were supposed to be rich when they got their first job, right? And it pays $27,000 a year. And for the first time, they try to balance a budget, and for the first time, they start thinking about paying off some debt. And what happens? Overload, discouragement of the worst possible kind. So we have to talk about money because it's so pertinent. It would be foolish, according to the scriptures, if we didn't. So this morning, we're going to kick off a series that's going to take us through January. I'm indebted to several guys, namely Andy Stanley, for the series, and we're just going to simply call it How to Be Rich. Sounds churchy, doesn't it? Here's where this comes from. I don't know about you, but I think we're surrounded by messages that are telling us how we can get rich. From the billboards about the lottery, from the casinos at the restaurants, from the recruiters who are telling us that if we go to college, we'll get rich. And by the way, rich isn't a problem with the scriptures. Let's just establish this right now. The scriptures never condemn wealth. It's not an issue of wealth. In fact, it would be silly if they did condemn wealth, because if poverty was some kind of spiritual discipline, then what God would effectively be saying is, let's take all the resources out of the hands of people who love me and put them in the hands of people who don't. It doesn't make no sense. The issue is not wealth. It's how do we be rich? And yet we're surrounded by messages of how to get rich, from the billboards and all that stuff to the well-intentioned relative, right, that pulls us aside at Christmas and he's like, hey, I'm a part of this new pyramid scheme, but don't worry, it's not a pyramid scheme. And if you'll just give me $500... right? That's how those conversations always go, and you'll be rich, right? But when's the last time we've been provoked to think about how to be rich? Not how to get rich, but how to be rich once we are rich. When's the last time that's happened? And see, here's what we're going to do, is we're just going to ask, like, how do we be a good rich person? To which some of you are going like, well, we'll see in February. Because I'm not rich. I doubt that my occupation will ever allow me to be rich. My wife will definitely never allow me to be rich, right? Like, we're never going to be rich, so check you in February, which is actually all the more reason to do the series, because here's the deal. Where's the line to rich and not rich? Like, who knows where that line really is? Like when do you pass from not rich to rich? Are you ever really going to get a promotion and go like, okay, I wasn't rich with my last pay scale, but I'm rich with this one? Are you ever going to get a check in the mail? Are you ever going to sit down in your office or on your couch on Monday morning or Monday night and go, wow, last Monday I wasn't rich. This is so cool. I'm rich this Monday. Ever picture that happening? No, why? Because the line, we don't know where it is. And here's what happens, is because we don't know where the line is, we just keep charging ahead towards how do I get rich? And all the while, we don't ever ask how do you be rich, because we're just focused on getting rich. And then what happens is we cross the line, and we don't know that we crossed the line, but we still don't ask how to get rich because we don't know that we are rich, and so we just continue to focus on being rich. How's that for a run-on sentence? So we're just going to ask, like, how do you be rich? This is why, we have friends, you know people who have crossed the line, and they don't know it. And this is why you could go up to them and you could go like, hey, are you rich? And they go like, no, Bill Gates is rich, I'm not rich. And you'd be going like, no, you're rich. Like, that'd be going on in your head, but they'd be going like, no, I'm not rich. Like, that guy's rich. They'd go the next tier up. This is why we have those interactions with rich people. I mean, not all rich people make bad decisions, but you ever have an interaction with a rich person where you just go like, you're bad at being rich? I was thinking of examples of this in my own life. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time with my great-grandparents. I grew up in Laurel, which is a refinery railroad town. My great-grandpa and grandma, I spent a lot of time with them on the Hushka side. Ralph, he was a carman, which means he worked on boxcars and made trains work. It was pretty easy work. And then Grandma was just a classic of her age. She didn't even have her own driver's license. Just Grandpa took care of her. They were the coolest people. I loved them so much. They smoked like 2 packs of Marlboros a day, and each. And then no matter who walked in the door, whether you were 11 or 41, Grandpa offered you a shot of Windsor. Didn't matter. Non-discriminatory. But they had my grandma had this brother who lived in Southern California. I've never met him. I don't know that he's ever been to Montana in my lifetime. But they would always kind of rag on, they were bad rich people. And here's the example that sticks in my brain. They would talk about that. So when it was my grandma's brother's birthday, she would send him a birthday card. Right? You'd go to Hallmark and you'd love Ralph and Rose. She'd send him a birthday card. And then when it was her birthday, she'd open the mail and she'd open this birthday card, and it would be the exact same birthday card. And they would take whiteout. Remember whiteout, that stuff when there was typewriters and you could, it didn't really work, but it was worth its weight in gold for little kids. And they would take whiteout and they would white out like Ralph and Rose and write the Fishers. Like, that's bad at being rich, right? Or have you ever met an arrogant rich person? And you go like, if I'm ever rich, I'm not going to look down on the waitress just because I'm rich. Ever met a rich person who you go like, man, you just make the weirdest decisions with your money. If I'm ever rich, I'm not going to do that. See, here's the deal. In fairness to them, they've crossed the line, and you think they've crossed the line. You know they've crossed the line. They don't know they've crossed the line, so they're not asking the question. So we're going to ask the question in case you've already crossed the line or in case someday you might be rich. Kind of the way we're going to go. But this morning what we got to focus on then is, where's the line? How do we know where the line is? See, God does a neat thing in the Scriptures. And you've probably heard this. You've heard this on TBN. You've heard this from all kinds of different people. The Bible talks a lot about money, right? And microphones. I don't know what's happening. I guess I can't sit down. The Bible talks a lot about money, right? Jesus talks a lot about money. Paul talks a lot about money. Lots of stuff in the Bible about money. But did you know that there's places in the Bible where it doesn't just talk about money? I didn't know this until I started studying for this series. It doesn't just talk about money. It talks directly to rich people. There are places in the Scriptures where God goes like, okay, everybody who's not rich, like, get out of the room, because I want to talk, like, everybody who's not rich, you go skiing. No, you can't go skiing unless you're rich, so don't do that. Like, I don't know, go roll around in the dirt. Everyone who's not rich, you leave. I'm going to talk to rich people. That's what God does. And there's one place in a book called 1 Timothy. Timothy was a person, not 1 Timothy. And he says to Timothy, okay, Timothy, so the deal is Paul was a leader in the church. He started most of the churches in the first century. And Timothy was one of the guys he left behind to lead churches in his stead. And he says in 1 Timothy to Timothy, Timothy, I want you to talk to rich people. And here's what he says. He says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so they may take hold of the life that is truly life. 3 verses. Next 4 weeks we're just going to spend on those 3 verses. This morning we're just going to start here. Command those who are rich in this present world. Command those who are rich in this present world. We're just going to start there because here's the question. Why does God section off a whole group of people, the inclusive God, right? Like the God who's like, hey, like I don't like discriminate people, I forgive everyone. Why does God, in his scriptures nonetheless, go, okay, this is only for rich people? Why would he do that? Which I think might lead to the question, what if God is sensitive to the fact that rich people have challenges and obstacles and opportunities and temptations that non-rich people don't have? What if rich people will deal with tensions and opportunities and stuff in their life that people who aren't rich won't ever have to deal with? And God is sensitive to that and says, I'd like to help you with that. Because see, rich people, don't they have all kinds of problems that non-rich people don't have? Like rich people, they have extra money. They have, like non-rich people, they don't have any concept of extra money. Rich people, they have extra money, and so they have to make decisions about like how are they going to save their extra money? Or are they going to save it all? Are they going to buy another car? Like what are they going to do with their extra money? There's lots of things they could have do. Some rich people, they even hire these people called financial advisors. So they pay people money to tell them what to do with their money because they're sensitive to the fact that they're going to run out of time before they run out of money. Like that's a rich person problem. Rich people have to go like, okay, what am I going to do when I'm out of time with all my money? Non-rich people don't have to deal with that. Rich people have extra food. Like rich people, they have these cupboards and these refrigerators in their house and they're chock full of food. And then they go to the grocery store and they buy more food and they bring it home and they take the old food and they throw it in the garbage. And then they take the new food and they put it in the refrigerator. And then they're teenagers, they open the refrigerator and they stare at this mountain of food and they say what? We don't have anything to eat. Not many of you have high school students. You just condemned yourself that you said that when you were there. Right? Like rich people, they have extra food. Rich people have extra time. There's this concept called vacation. Non-rich people don't have any concept of this. But rich people, it's the craziest thing. Their bosses say to them, okay, check this out. We're going to give you a couple weeks a year and we're going to pay you and we don't want you to come to work. That's a weird problem, right? That's a rich person problem. And then rich people, they have all these fights. Some of their best fights of the whole year are over this free time. What are we going to do with it? Are we going to go skiing? Are we going to go to the mountains? Are we going to work on the house? What are we going to do this extra money? Are we going to buy a motorhome and we'll like fight the whole time we load it and the whole time we unload it? But we'll have fun. We're going to have fun, right? Did your dad ever say that? We're going to enjoy this trip. Rich people have extra time. They have to be sensitive to fashion and design, and they might not even like it, but it's like, if I'm going to go to that, I can't dress the same thing that I wore to college in 1972, and so they have to think about fashion. And so rich people, particularly their wives, I'm told, though I think Metro males are catching up, rich people will open their closets, and there will be a mountain of clothing. And what will they say? I don't have anything to wear. It's a rich person problem. Rich people, they don't only have houses, they have houses for their cars. Like most of the world, they don't own a house. Rich people, they have houses for themselves. They have houses for their car, and they go into their house for their car, and they have so much stuff that the car won't fit in its own house, right? Or they'll look at the car, and the car works really, really well, and they'll say, "What? I need a new car." What do you mean you need a new car? The car works. Or rich people, like they'll have 2 driver's licenses and 4 cars. See, rich people, they have all kinds of problems non-rich people don't have. They even have these extra rooms in their house, and you can't go in there because someday someone might sleep in there, right? Like non-rich people, they sleep on the floor. Rich people, they have these rooms, and if the kids go in there, like there's meltdown syndrome. No, you can't go in there, can't go in there. Why can't I go in there? Because someday grandma's going to sleep in there. It's a rich person problem. But here's the deal. God says, I want to help rich people. The problem is we don't know where the line is. We don't know whether or not I'm rich, because rich is a weird thing. Like if I said, who here is athletic? Some of you would raise your hands. Who here likes the Broncos? None of you would raise your hands. Like who? I don't know. Who here is musical? Who here is grouchy? Yeah, that's me. Who here is annoying? Yeah, that's me. But if I said, who's rich? You'd be like, well, that's not me. And you wouldn't even be lying. You'd be like, well, Bill Gates is rich, my boss is rich, my sister's rich, and there'd be people down the aisle going like, tell her to raise her hand, she's rich. Because we're not comfortable understanding, we don't know where the line is at. And here's what happens, here's why this is pertinent then. Because God in the scriptures says like, hey, I want to talk to rich people. And probably if you're like me, when you hear that, you go like, he does? Never read that in the scriptures. Probably because you've done the same thing I've always done. Kind of like when you get to the genealogies and it's like Hebrew, blah, 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 and it's all these people were born, and when you read the book of Numbers and it's like, there were 12,000 Judaizers, and you're like, why do I care? And you just skip it. We get to talk to those who are rich, and we go like, I'm out. I'm not a wife, and I'm not rich. I can skip both of those sections of Scripture, and I can do that. We don't ever consider, what do I do if I'm rich? Because we don't ever read the text. So where's the line? And how do we figure the line out? Well, Gallup did a poll recently that they asked Americans, they were curious what Americans' perceptions were of who's wealthy and who's not. So they asked people who made less than $30,000 a year, how much money would you have to make to be rich? The response was, well, if I made more than $74,000 a year, then I'd be rich. But if you make more than $74,000 a year and someone said, hey, are you rich? You'd be going like, are you nuts? No, I got student loans, and I got car payments, and I got to save for my kids' college, and I got grocery bills, and no, I'm not rich. And so then they asked people who make between $30,000 and $50,000 a year, how much does it take to be rich? You know what they said? $100,000. If I could make $100,000, then I'd be rich. And if you're going to make $100,000 a year, you're going, those people are naive. They have no idea all the costs in my life. And so then they said, okay, well, what if, because you see what's happening is people are basically saying, if I could double my income, then I'd be rich. And then they asked people, they just wanted to get out a feel for what is the median number. Like, if you take all the Americans and ask, what does it take to be rich, what's the median number? The number was $120,000 a year. And yet if you're here and you make $120,000 a year, you're going like, those people don't know what they're talking about. Because I got a lot of bills, and I am far from rich. So then they took the nation's top income earners, and they said, what does it take to be rich? You know what they said? $5 million in liquid assets, because then I could have $200,000 a year on interest, and I could live off that $200,000, and the $5 million could sit in the bank, then I'd be rich. And you're going, well, I guess so. Right? I mean, you see the problem? It's a moving target. Like, it's constantly moving. How about nationally or internationally? What if we were to think about this from an international perspective? Well, if you make $37,000 a year, you're among the top 4% of income earners in the country. Now, we're going to talk more about America and the guilt that comes with that and all those different things. So I understand cost of living. I'm not naive to that. None of us are. But still, $37,000 a year, top 4%. If you make, is it $44,000? $45,000? $45,000 a year. If your household makes $45,000 a year, there's only, line up every person on the planet, only 1 in 100 could step into the same group that you're a part of. Maybe we could think of it this way. If 10 years ago, I was talking to a friend between services and we were processing all this. If 10 years ago, someone said to you, hey, in 2012, your salary will be this, I'll bet your response would have been, we'll be rich. We'll be filthy rich. See, rich is a moving target. And maybe rich is, well, I have more than I need. I have more than I need. There's a story about Bill Gates. And Bill Gates, when he realized he was rich, he started a foundation. See, there's a point. If Bill Gates has to realize he's rich, then the line is unclear, right? And so Bill Gates realized he was rich, and so to his credit, he established a foundation, and he was traveling the world to figure out what to do with his wealth and how to best leverage his wealth, and he ended up in a remote part of India in this gal's tent, and he said to he had a translator and a journalist, and when he left, the journalist said to this Indian gal, hey, did you know the guy that just left your tent is the wealthiest man in the world? And they say that the Indian gal, through the translator, said to the journalist, total deadpan, no emotion, everybody from the West is rich. There's actually a gal of Indian heritage that's a part of Narrate and was at the first service, and she came up to me afterwards and she said, that's so funny that you tell that story. She said, because my dad left India and went to college and he never went back to India, and I have these memories of a little girl, and I would go to India and visit my cousins, and all my cousins would look at me and say, you're rich, and it would be so confusing to me, she said. And she said, at one time I asked my dad on the plane ride home, Dad, are we rich? And he said, yeah, we're rich. We have money to buy airplane tickets and go see your family, and then we can still eat when we get home. What if rich is a moving target? And I know we need to be sensitive to the fact that some of you, you're not feeling rich. You lost a job. You're in college. You're a high schooler, junior high student. Well, did you know that junior high and high school students have the largest expendable income in the world? Like no people group on the planet have a larger expendable income than junior high and high school students. So at the same time, I still want to be sensitive to those of you that are suffering and dealing with unemployment and things like that. But I still think where the conversation starts is like, are you willing to admit that you're rich? It's really uncomfortable. If your son came home, if your daughter came home from school, or if your friend looked at you at a coffee shop and said, are you rich? None of us wants to answer that question yes. I would suggest to you that Paul would look at you and go, well, do you have more than you need? Because it's foreign to us to read these scriptures, but maybe our whole country goes, wow, he's talking to us. I'm rich. Now, I want to land here. When you talk about wealth, instantly you have guilt that comes to the surface. When you talk about being an American, instantly we can be led to feel guilty, right? Like, and what can I do about it? I just want to say this, and really as a preface to the rest of the series. Guilt is never a tool that God utilizes. Nowhere in the scriptures does God utilize guilt to bring about positive change. It's not the way God rolls. In fact, if you're someone who's realizing you're rich, you probably are also aware of the fact that you're not directly responsible for it. You didn't have any control over when you were born or where you were born, what nation you were born in, what parents you were born to. And yeah, you work hard. I understand that. Like, we don't want to be naive to the fact that like you work hard and oftentimes that translates to more money. But we also need to be sensitive to the fact that lots of single mothers in remote parts of India work 10 times harder than any of us, and they're still poor. See, what happens is you can come to the realization that you're wealthy, and it's not about guilt. It's about recognizing that it is a gift. And when someone gives you a gift, you're not supposed to feel guilty. What are you supposed to feel? Thankful. Gratitude, right? There are people who are a part of Narrate, and they are great at being rich. There's a lot of you. And you're fantastic at being rich. And some of them make six figures, and some of them make $18,000 a year. And what they will all tell you, I just guarantee it, is if you could get with them and you could ask them, like, how did you get it in order? How did you start getting responsible with your finances? They won't tell you guilt. They'll tell you responsibility and gratitude. I became aware of the fact that I have way more than I need and that I'm responsible for it. People who wake up and get serious about their finances and become encouraged to like ask the question, what does it look like to be a good, rich person? Do it not because of guilt, not because of shame, but because they recognize God has given them more than they need. And they're thankful and they're grateful. So are you rich? And are you comfortable with the question, like, how do I be rich? We'll continue next week. Let me pray. God, money is such a loaded topic. It's emotionally loaded, God. Our experiences vary, and thus even the very words that I've used this morning are tainted and influenced by personal past experiences. And God, quite frankly, your church and your people haven't always done a good job with this subject. But we're trusting you, God, in this season to lead us into a conversation that helps us live better. I pray that if ever the motivation is self-interest on my part or Narrate's part, that you would snuff it out and make it known, God, but ultimately that you would lead people to get really serious about this question. Like, am I willing to admit that I'm wealthy, that I have more than I need, and that God is inviting me to use that in very specific ways. We sure love you, Jesus. Thanks for letting us be the church together. Amen.